The train left her at Dunmore Junction on a Tuesday in November, and the platform was empty by the time she got her bag down from the rack. There was no one holding a sign. There was no one holding anything. The station master pointed her toward a wagon at the far end of the yard without looking up from his ledger, and she walked to it with her coat buttoned to the throat and her bag in both hands. The man waiting by the wagon was not what she had expected. She hadn't expected much. The letter had been brief to the point of discourtesy. One paragraph, block letters, no salutation. Housekeeper needed. Ranch work, Saskatchewan. Room and board, $2 a week. Reply to Box 14, Dunmore. She had replied. She had received a train ticket and a date. That was the extent of their correspondence. He was standing with his back to her when she came around the wagon, checking the harness on the near horse with his good hand. The other arm, the right one, hung at a careful angle, the kind of careful that meant it had learned to be careful after something had made it necessary. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the gravel, and she noticed that he turned with his whole body rather than just his head, the way men did when a shoulder wouldn't cooperate. He looked at her bag, then at her. "You're the one from Regina," he said. "Yes." He took her bag with his left hand and put it in the wagon bed without being asked. She climbed up herself before he could decide whether to offer assistance. He came around to the other side, and they pulled out of the yard without further conversation. The land opened flat in every direction. November had taken the color out of it. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the ground was the color of the sky, and somewhere in between was the horizon, indistinct, unreliable. She had grown up in a place like this. She recognized the specific quality of its loneliness, not hostile, not kind, just indifferent in the way that large things are indifferent. She watched the road. After a while she said, "How far?" 2 hours if the creek hasn't frozen over. 3 if it has. It had. They went around. The ranch house came into view just as the light was failing. She cataloged it the way she cataloged everything, quickly, methodically, without appearing to look. The fence line on the east side had come down in at least 4 places. The barn needed caulking on the north wall. She could see the gaps from the road where the chinking had fallen out. There was a trough near the corral that had split along the seam and was being held together with wire that wouldn't last another hard freeze. The kitchen garden had gone to weed and then past weeding. It would need to be broken up entirely in the spring and started again from nothing. The house itself was standing. That was the best she could say for it. Inside, she didn't take her coat off until she had located the stove and confirmed it was drawing. It was drawing, barely. The firebox needed cleaning. There were 3 days of dishes in the basin and a pot on the back burner with something in it that had been there long enough to become geological. She found the ash bucket and started on the firebox. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. "Mrs. Dunnett at the church said you had experience," he said. "I do, with ranch work, not just housekeeping." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I grew up on a ranch outside of Moose Jaw. My father ran Herefords. My husband ran a mixed operation near Weyburn before he died." She turned back to the stove. "I know how to milk cows twice a day. I know which one to milk first so the others don't get anxious. I know how to read a herd." He was quiet for a moment. "I've got 11 head," he said, "dairy, and 14 beef cattle on the east quarter." "How many of the dairy are fresh?" 7. "And you've been managing the milking yourself." It wasn't a question. She could see by the state of the house how the milking had been managed. A man alone, working one-handed, keeping the animals alive and letting everything else go. She had seen it before. She had seen what came before that too. The event that turned a functioning operation into this kind of managed decline. She didn't ask about it. It wasn't her business yet. Maybe it would never be. "Supper in an hour," she said. "If you have salt pork and dried peas, pantry," he said. He didn't move for another moment. Then he went. She was up at 4:30 the next morning. He was already in the barn. She came in with the second lantern and hung it on the post without asking where he wanted it. He was working his way down the line with the one-handed technique she'd been expecting, the kind that got the job done and permanently irritated a cow's disposition over time. She took the stool and the bucket from the hook and moved to the next animal without comment. They worked in parallel. The barn was cold and the breath of the cattle made small clouds in the lantern light. Outside, the wind had come up during the night and was running hard across the yard, finding every gap in the boards. She had her bucket full and was starting on the second cow before he finished his first. He glanced over. She didn't look back. She had learned a long time ago that competence was better demonstrated than explained. By the end of the week, she had established the morning routine without discussing it. 4:30, barn. 7. Breakfast on the table. 8. Whatever needed doing. And there was always something that needed doing, a list that seemed to replenish itself overnight. She fixed the fence on the east side, using wire from the roll she'd found under the workbench. She replaced the trough seam with a proper board and sealant she'd found in the tack room, and she drained it and refilled it before the next hard freeze came. He watched her do all of it. Sometimes he helped. Mostly he watched. She found the grave on a Saturday afternoon in her second week when she went to the far side of the poplar stand to look at a section of fence he'd mentioned needed attention. It was a small marker, a flat stone with a name cut into it by someone who was not a stonemason. The name was a woman's. The date said she had been 26. She stood there for a moment, reading nothing else, assuming nothing. Then she went to look at the fence. At supper that night, he was quieter than usual, and he was not a talkative man to begin with. She put the food on the table and sat across from him, and ate without filling the silence. She had learned that certain silences were not empty. They were full of things a person was carrying, and the worst thing you could do was try to replace them with words. After a while he said, without preamble, "The shoulder. You've been wondering." She looked up. "It's your business." "It was a horse," he said, 3 years ago. She was trying to get the horse out of the barn when it caught fire. The smoke got into the horse's head and it came down on me when I went in after her. He paused. "I got the horse out. I didn't get her out." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not I'm so sorry, not how terrible. Just the plain acknowledgement that something had happened that deserved to be acknowledged." He nodded once and looked back at his plate. She had no more to say about it, and neither did he, but something in the room had shifted slightly, the way air shifts when a window is opened somewhere in the house. Not a dramatic change, just a small, steady exchange. The real problem with the operation declared itself in December. She had been keeping her own numbers, not formally, just in the back of a small notebook she'd had since Weyburn. Animals, feed, yield, expenditure. The kind of accounting she had always done because the numbers told you things before the land did. The numbers here were telling her something she suspected he already knew and had chosen not to look at directly. She brought the notebook to the table after supper one Sunday. "When did you last sell?" she asked. He said nothing for a moment. "Spring. And the note on the east quarter." He looked at the notebook, then at her. "LeConte at the bank," he said. "February." She did the arithmetic in her head. "February is 11 weeks. I know. What are you short?" he told her. It was more than $2 a week. She looked at the notebook. She thought about the dairy yield, which had improved steadily since she'd regularized the milking schedule and adjusted the feed ratio. She thought about the fence she'd fixed, and the trough, and the caulking she had done on the north barn wall on a day when he'd been in town, standing on a ladder in the wind with a bucket of mortar because the gap was only getting larger. "The yield is up," she said. "I know. If we push it through to the Kindersley market instead of Dunmore, the margin is better. I've looked at the rates." He looked at her. "How do you know the rates?" I asked at the post office. She turned a page in the notebook. "There's also the matter of the back 40. You've got it sitting empty. If you put winter wheat in it in the spring, and if the yield is half of what that soil should give, it covers the note." He was quiet for a long time. "I haven't put anything in that field in 3 years," he said. She knew why. The field was on the same side of the property as the grave. "I know," she said. She did not tell him what to do about it. She closed the notebook and put it on the table between them, where he could look at it or not look at it as he chose. Then she refilled his cup and took hers and sat back down. He reached for the notebook and opened it to the first page. She watched him read. January came in hard. The kind of January that made you understand why people had left this country in the first place and why the ones who stayed had developed a particular quality. Not toughness exactly, but something more like patience with the intractable. A willingness to wait for spring without guarantees. The cattle needed extra attention in weather like this. She was putting in 14-hour days without thinking about it, because there was nothing to think about. There was only the next thing that needed doing. The ice on the water lines, the supplemental feed for the dairy cows, the calving that would come in late February, and the preparations that needed to happen before then. She taught him to milk with his left hand alone in a way that didn't agitate the animals. It took 3 sessions and some patience on both sides. He was not a man who learned new things easily, not because he wasn't capable, but because he had arrived at a settled way of doing everything, and it cost him something to abandon it. She understood that. She had been that way herself, once, before Wayburn had taken her settled ways and replaced them with the understanding that settling was a temporary condition. One morning, in late January, she was adjusting the lantern in the barn when he said, without looking up from the cow he was working, "You were a teacher before." She set the lantern back on the post. "What makes you say that? The way you show things. You don't tell. You show, and then you step back." She considered this. "I was going to be a teacher," she said. "I didn't finish. I got married instead." She paused. "And then I wasn't married." He was quiet for a moment. "I almost sold the place," he said. "Last spring. LeConte offered to take it off my hands at what he called a fair price." He kept working. "I knew what fair price meant to LeConte." "Yes," she said. "I put the ad in the paper instead." She understood what he was not saying, that the ad had not been a solution precisely. It had been a form of continuing, a decision to remain in motion for another season and see what that produced. She had made the same kind of decision herself, once, in a different way, in a different winter. She picked up her stool and moved to the next cow and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the work itself wasn't already saying. February brought the calving. She had been watching the herd since December, reading the signs the way you read signs. Not all at once, but incrementally, a series of small observations that accumulated into a picture. The first calf came on a Thursday morning before 4, and she was there for it, and it went well. The second and third came within a week of each other, and they went well too. The fourth cow was the problem. She spent the better part of a night in the barn for that one, and he was there for most of it, his good hand where it needed to be, his shoulder managing in the way it managed. Less than it had been, but more than it had been in November, she thought. Something in how he held himself had changed. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice if you were the kind of person who noticed. The calf lived. The cow was exhausted and would need watching for a day or two, but she would be fine. He sat back against the stall boards when it was over and looked at the ceiling of the barn the way you look at a ceiling when you've been holding tension for several hours and can finally release it. "There were 2 calves last year," he said. "I lost them both." She was cleaning up. She did not stop cleaning up. "What do you want to do with this one?" she asked. He looked at the calf, which was finding its legs with that specific determination of new things that have no choice but to try. "Keep it," he said. She nodded. She had thought he would say that. Spring came the way it always comes on the prairie. Not all at once, but in small concessions. A degree warmer, an hour more of light, the sound of water moving somewhere under the snow. She watched the back 40 the way you watch something you've been thinking about for a while. In March, he hitched the horses without telling her what he was doing. She saw him from the kitchen window, working the harness, taking his time with it, doing the buckle on the right side with his left hand and a patience she recognized. She put on her coat and went out. He was running the first furrow down the length of the field by the time she got there. She stood at the fence line and watched him go. The earth turned dark behind the plow blade, the good smell of broken ground coming up even in the cold. The horses moved steadily. He sat straight on the seat, which was something she had not seen him do. Not quite, not until now. She went back inside and started on the bread she'd been going to make anyway. He came in at noon, cold through, and she put the bread on the table and he ate most of it without ceremony. "Seeds," he said. "I'll need to go to Kindersley." "I made a list," she said. She put it on the table beside the bread. He picked it up, read it, set it down. "This is exactly what I was going to order," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and there was something in his expression that she didn't name, because naming things too early was how you got them wrong. By April, the yard looked different. Not transformed, She was not a person who believed in transformations, which implied something sudden and total. What had happened was more ordinary and more lasting than that. The fence line was sound. The trough held water. The barn was weather-tight. The dairy yield had held through the winter, and the spring numbers were strong. The kitchen garden was turned and seeded. In the first week she could get a spade into the ground. She found, that spring, that she was not counting the weeks the same way she had been counting them in November. One evening in April, he came into the kitchen while she was writing in the notebook. Not the accounts notebook, a different one, smaller, that she'd had since before Weyburn, and he set a cup of tea beside her without asking if she wanted it. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. "LeConte came by today," he said, sitting down. "And I paid the note." He said it the way you say something you've been holding for a while and have finally set down. "Half from the dairy, half from the grain I had in storage." He looked at the window. "I told him I'd have winter wheat in the east field by fall." She folded the small notebook closed. "What did LeConte say?" she asked. "He said he'd believe it when he saw it." He picked up his own cup. "He'll see it." She thought about the furrow she had watched him run in March, seeds they had ordered from Kindersley, the way the earth had turned, dark and willing, behind the plow. "Yes," she said, "he will." They sat with that for a while. The stove ticked. Outside, the evening was doing the thing that April evenings did on the prairie, turning the light a color that had no name in English, something between gold and gray that lasted about 10 minutes and then was gone. She had always thought it was the best 10 minutes of the day, out here, the kind of thing you had to be in the right place to see. She did not say this to him, but she didn't leave the kitchen either. He refilled her cup without asking. She let him. Months later, in a conversation she would not have predicted in November, he asked her what she had thought when she arrived, what she had seen. She told him about the fence, the trough, the gap in the barn wall, the kitchen garden. He listened. "You noticed all of that," he said, "before we got to the house. You notice things," she said, "or you don't." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you think," he said carefully, "when you noticed the man?" She considered how to answer this honestly. "I thought," she said, "that the land and the man had made the same decision, that things could either get worse or get better, and they were waiting to see which one somebody would choose." He looked at her. "Did you think it would be you?" he asked. She picked up her cup. "I thought it would have to start somewhere," she said. The prairie evening was doing its thing outside the window. 10 minutes of that light, the color with no name, before the dark came. She had been here for almost a year. She had watched it 100 times, that light, from this window, from the barn door, from the fence line on the east side, where the wheat was showing in green rows now, steady and unremarkable and entirely improbable. The country had not asked for her opinion about any of it. It never did. It had only offered the conditions and left the rest to whoever was willing to stay. She had stayed. That was the whole of it, and it was enough.